Okay. Well, welcome everybody. This is the October 16th meeting of the Gloucester Affordable Housing Trust. And I'd like to call the meeting into session. I'm still new at this, so do I ask for a second on that, or do we just go ahead and?
Nope, you don't need to.
Okay, great. So it's been a month since we met, and I purposely kept the agenda really short for tonight because we're all doing great work to get a funding program up and going to commit our federal ARPA funding for housing in 2024. So the agenda tonight is really about walking through the first draft of this funding program. So I just want to start by thanking Heather and Deanna, who agreed to really work on this with me and did that for the last month, put a number of hours into kind of really being thoughtful and conscientious and pulling together examples from other jurisdictions that have kind of similar funding programs that we wanted to consider, and pulling in the public input from the mayoral listening sessions that occurred last year to make sure we were taking those into account, and reading over our own strategic plan and our 2017 housing production plan, and then sitting down and really helping to get this drafted out. So thank you, Heather and Deanna. And it's pretty amazing.
Thank you.
We did this in a couple of weeks. So
Great work.
yeah, what we're going to do tonight is with all of you, share the document on the screen and walk you through the document in its current form. Then the idea would be to have kind of the next month as a period of time where you can go away and read it, and you can absorb it and give any feedback and suggested edits or changes that you might have to what we've done to us. And we'll come back again in a month with what we hope will be then, if with any luck, a final version to be approved. The goal from there would be to have the program go live, if you will, by January of 2024. So we're trying to build in, we're a little ahead of the schedule we set for ourselves a month ago, which is good. It'll give the whole trust board a little more time to read what we've prepared and think about it and see if it makes sense to you and give us feedback. So with that, I think this should take an hour, maybe not that long. Deanna's going to go ahead and share the document on her screen. We did email it to the board, to all of you, a little earlier in the day. So we didn't think that you'd have a chance with so little time to read it. So that's why we're going to actually, yeah, of course not, right? We're going to actually walk all of you through the document. It's not so long that we can't do that. And then you can go away having been briefed on it, and then read it some more yourself and give feedback and comments. So we'll wait for Deanna here to load up.
Can you see my screen?
I can.
Can everybody?
I see.
I
Okay.
can't see it, Deanna, but I have a hard copy. I don't know
Yeah.
about others.
Yeah.
Yeah, Deanna, I'm just seeing your folders, not the actual document, but I see your screen.
Right.
Okay, because I see it on mine and I don't know what I'm doing wrong.
If you go to the document and then share screen, try that.
You are.
Oh, okay. Let me try that.
And sorry for my barking dog.
Mine's
So-
gonna do the same thing, so I'm gonna keep muting.
So Deanna, yes, now when you hit share screen, you should be
Yep.
able to see the window that is just the Word doc, and that's what people will see.
I see Deanna.
Okay, it's on my, maybe I'm not going to be able to do this well. So,
Hey,
yep,
Almost
this
there.
isn't it. How do I get to my desktop?
So just minimize that that window by hitting the dash in the upper right corner.
Ah, okay.
And
Now I get a
then,
You have a photo. You have one right there. Folder, affordable housing.
Yeah, the
trust in the
folder's
middle.
right there. There you go.
here it
There we
comes.
go.
There you
All
go.
Hey, there we go.
Thank you.
Okay,
Who
can
the
you all
door-
hear me? Did I mute myself or can you hear me?
Can hear you.
Cool, okay. All right, so we'll walk you right through it. As obviously a cover, we were so bold as to suggest that we should consider calling this the Gloucester Affordable Housing Fund to give it its own kind of moniker within the trust. So we can change that if people have good creative ideas for a better name, but that's the working name. So go ahead, Deanna, move down through the cover. Now, first, we're taken to a table of contents, right? So the Gloucester Affordable Housing Fund guidelines, and then we've got roles and responsibilities of the trust in an overall sense. We've framed this, called this a NOFA, or Notice of Funding Availability. So there's a description under Roman numeral 2 of the NOFA itself. Roman numeral 3 describes the eligible applicants and eligible activities under the program. Roman numeral 4 is funding priorities for the program. Then we provide applicants with a process, an overall process and funding timeline. We mentioned a month ago we were going to use, and we have used, a selection criteria, which is really a rating and ranking criteria, which is under Roman numeral 6. And then we describe how project monitoring and project reporting will happen if someone receives an award. Then the second part of the package is the application guidelines, requirements, and the actual application form itself. So the idea here is this document, once we finalize it in a month, would be posted onto the Affordable Housing Trust's page within the city's website. I've talked to David in the last week. So he assures me we can work with the city's IT person after we finalize this to have this document made available to interested applicants and the public through the website in time for our deadline. So our timeline. So Deanna, do you want to then move ahead? So I don't think it's probably a great use of time to kind of read the whole document to you, but I can give you the highlights, right? So Roman numeral 1, roles and responsibilities of the Gloucester Affordable Housing Trust Fund, is really language lifted directly from our strategic plan and our own website. It's going to be familiar to all of you, as it's really designed to give the public and an applicant a broad overview of the trust, our duties, our powers, our authorities, etc. So that's really what Roman numeral is about. And so, as I said, we did frame this, cast this as a NOFA, or Notice of Funding Availability, when we looked at a number of other jurisdictions, including Beverly and Lynn. We looked at least 2 other towns and cities too. This use of a concept of a NOFA is pretty widely used. So we adopted it for this program as well. So it's really just telling the applicants that the city's committed a one-time investment of $1.5 million of ARPA money. And it provides the dates for the opening of this NOFA and the closing date for it. So when we were together a month ago, I think we all agreed that whereas sometimes these NOFAs are rolling and kind of stay open for as long as necessary for funding to be committed, in this case, because we really only have 12 months to commit this money within, we agreed last month that we would put together a NOFA with a hard start and ending date. So we've given applicants from January 1st until April 30th at 4 p.m. to submit completed application packets. So that gives applicants 120 days, is it? Let's say January, February, March, and April, right? 4 months within which to submit an application. We also said here, though, or until such time as the $1.5 million of funding has been committed. So if we make a determination toward the end of the period that we don't have a sufficient number of applications to commit all of the funding, then I think there's wiggle room there to extend the deadline. Then Roman numeral 3 describes eligible applicants and activities. So the NOFA is directed to nonprofit and for-profit organizations or individuals that are interested and capable of providing or preserving affordable housing within the city of Gloucester. And then later in this section, we talk about 3 distinct areas where funding could be used by an applicant and applied for: site acquisition funding, pre-development funding, and development funding. So with site acquisition funding, we're talking about the costs associated with land or property acquisition. You'll see that the key phrases here are that we're looking for future housing development that targets units at or below 60% of the area median income. It's also significant to point out we're suggesting we limit this type of use of funding to nonprofits only, and that we would use a certified real estate appraisal to establish fair market value in order to determine an amount of money to commit for acquisition funding. Pre-development funding is money that a developer might need prior to the start of construction for pre-development activities such as architectural and engineering fees, legal fees, etc. We're suggesting up to $75,000 per project as a maximum amount to be made available as a pre-development grant. And then the final category of funding is development funding, which we have described as funding that could be used for new construction, housing preservation, the rehabilitation of existing housing, or for use in a mixed-use residential development opportunity. And then we've gone ahead and we've suggested in this draft varying levels of funding on a per unit basis that could be available to an applicant, starting with $25,000 per unit for units that are targeted at 80% of the area median income, all the way down, or up, I should say, to $60,000 per unit for units targeted at 30% of area median income. So the idea here really is that, right, the more deeply affordable the unit, the more grant money there is available to the applicant developer to help them defer the cost of construction and development. We've also included in this section that up to $75,000 per project in development funding could be available for ownership units at or below 80% of AMI. That's a per unit amount. You want to go down further, Deanna? Thank you. We've also indicated and suggested here that we would make an additional amount of funding up to $25,000 available for family-sized units defined as 2 bedrooms or more, or accessible units, meaning handicapped accessible units, or for projects incorporating wraparound services with service providers as part of the team where the units are designated for disadvantaged households. So by that, we mean individuals experiencing homelessness or victims of domestic violence or individuals with disabilities. So section 4, really then, this is where we took into account and spent a lot of time looking at the input that we received through the mayor's listening posts from the public around their feelings and views on kind of priorities for use of ARPA money to tackle affordable housing and housing issues. So what we say in the beginning really is that we've got funding priorities that are articulated in this document, which will be subject to change from time to time by the trust to ensure that our priorities are in line with our community's priorities. And then as we get further into the section, we see a number of bullets that actually articulate priorities for this program. And I think they're going to look familiar to everybody here on the board. We talk about prioritizing applications from development teams that have the capacity to deliver a project and to do so within a reasonable project timeline. We talk about proposed projects that are going to maximize the number of affordable units that get created with our money and projects that leverage other state and local funding sources. We talk about as a priority projects that will create new rental and home ownership units that are affordable to households with median incomes between 30 and 80% of AMI, but with a preference, which is clear from the weighted amount of funding we're making available, with a preference and additional funding available for units at or below 60% AMI. We talk about projects that promote a fair and equal access to housing for all Gloucester residents. We talk about projects that will preserve, this is important, right? To preserve existing housing stock in the city, to protect year-round rental options, and to help prevent displacement. we have as a priority projects that provide long-term affordability, and we want to come back to that at the end of the document. We do need as a group to think about and decide upon what that long-term affordability term ought to be. But that's where we're getting into the idea of a deed restriction or some other covenant to ensure the housing is long-term affordable. We see as a priority projects that provide housing that employees of local businesses can afford. So we read back through the notes and the input from the public, and that came up again and again. So that was important, we thought, to include projects that incorporate wraparound services with a preference for disadvantaged households. Again, that ties back to the funding on the previous page. Projects that improve access to housing for Gloucester residents via a local preference, right? So developers can have a local preference. They don't have to. I think what we're saying here as a priority is we'd like to see projects that do include a local preference for local people. And then projects that provide housing within a transit-oriented development, which means a proposed housing development that is located in an area well served by public services and transportation options. And then the next three bullets we thought deserve to stand apart just to draw attention to them, that all other criteria being equal, we're looking for projects that have been fully vetted, for which all feasibility studies and permitting and neighborhood support have been obtained. We want to reiterate that we're looking for projects that are going to add new and additional units to our city's affordable housing stock, and that we're looking for projects that will utilize our funding to leverage grant or loan funds, all together sufficient to complete the contemplated project. So take a look at those priorities over the next week or so. See if you think we've missed anything. If you think we've captured the priorities correctly, we'd love to hear that too. But by all means, if there's areas where you think we should include a priority that we haven't, please let us know. Here we talk about, under Roman numeral 5, an application process and funding timeline. So these are really all based on the idea that this ARPA money needs to be committed in 2024. So we're suggesting that the notice of funding availability for this ARPA funding round would be open and go live on January 1. I do realize that that could be a weekend or a day where it doesn't really work, or a day when people are waking up from having too much fun the night before on New Year's Eve. So it could be that it's better to happen sometime between the 1st and the 5th, but we're really
Mondays-
suggesting that it happen
Mondays
right
are-
away, first week of January.
Monday's New Year's Day.
Monday's New Year's Day. So perhaps we're talking really about Tuesday the 2nd or Wednesday the 3rd, but we do think, we thought in the working group that getting the NOFA out during that first week of January was important for timing. That then we would keep the application window open for those roughly 120 days, with the application NOFA window closing on April 30th, no later than 4 p.m., where later in the application, the instructions are for the applicant to deliver 2 completed application packets by 4 p.m. on April 30th to the Community Development Office, the City of Gloucester. Then what we say is really starting from the next day through the end of June, a 2-month period we're giving ourselves, that this trust board will meet and review all the applications received. We might decide to ask any applicant to come in and give a presentation on their proposed project. Part of what will happen in those 60 days is we'll use the rating and ranking rubric, which we'll see in a minute, to rank all these projects. I think we're going to get a number of them, so we would put them kind of in order and score them. And my understanding from talking to David last week is really then that we're passing on our recommendations with all of the applications we receive to the mayor's office and to the community development team, who will do their own review and pass it on to the city council, who ultimately will review up or down, yes or no, the expenditure of these funds. So I'm giving us as a trust body kind of 2 months between May 1 and June 30th to do that review and rating and ranking work. I'm suggesting also, doesn't say it here, but that we would upload all of the applications we receive onto the trust's website during early May, so that they're available for the public to inspect and see. And then we say here in the timeline that on or after June 30th, which is what we would expect, that the mayor and the council will do their work to issue final approvals on the trust's recommended projects. Okay, go ahead, Deanna. Here's the rating and ranking rubric. Sorry, my dog is gonna bark right at the wrong time at the city fire truck, so I apologize. I'm gonna stop him. This is a really interesting approach that we found a number of communities are using, and we really think we should use it here, which is that you go through a series of selection criteria, which are described in the table, and you assign points to each application that's received, with a maximum of 100 points across the various categories being possible. And then in doing that, you can rate and rank all of your applications in relation to each other. It gives a nice way for us as a trust board and the mayor and the city council to, well, really prioritize projects in the event that we are oversubscribed. If we get more requests for funding than funding that we have to give out, then we have a way really to make sense of how to prioritize the applications we receive. So the categories are going to seem, I think, very logical to all of you. Development team capacity, 10 points in total. You really are going to need through your application to demonstrate a successful history of completing similar projects. And then you can get 15 points in the next category for demonstrating feasibility and project readiness. There's an additional 10 points for financial feasibility. That's really up to the applicant to demonstrate their project's financially feasible and that they're leveraging other public and private resources for funding. There's 10 points for a project timeline. This is important, right? Because we know that we need to commit this funding in 2024, and we know that the funding really needs to be spent by the end of 2026. So there's a 10-point possibility within project timeline for meeting that deadline. Affordability objectives, there's 15 points for that. We're looking for projects that create new affordable housing that targets lower income households. Then we have a catch-all category, which allows an applicant to demonstrate that their building is green and includes sustainable design features, that their building or project includes spaces that benefits members of the general public, or that they're hiring local workforce, a local workforce, and providing workforce development opportunities, or that they're providing supportive housing for a disadvantaged population. The third to last category for 10 points, the proposed project is consistent with our goals and objectives and our 2017 Gloucester Housing Production Plans goals and objectives. And this one was important too. We thought, we're not sure if we'll have a comprehensive plan in place by the time we commit this money. We probably won't, but we've got it in there that projects that can evidence that they're meeting needs identified in Gloucester's comprehensive plan would be prioritized for points in this section. The second to last is about housing innovation. So applicants that are doing something innovative and demonstrating a new approach to kind of solving our affordable housing issues could receive up to 10 points in this section. And then lastly, this one's always important, to be able to demonstrate you've engaged in the community, you have community support from residents and organizations in and around the site you're proposing to develop. Yeah. So that is what rating and ranking is all about. We'll go through each one of the applications and we'll actually assign points. We may decide to have a kind of working group. We may decide to do it as a board group altogether. I guess we'll have to decide on that, but we're suggesting that we use that rating and ranking rubric to score the applications. And then really these two sections speak for themselves, right? So we know from doing our research here on this program and talking to other jurisdictions, talking to David, who's quite helpful, that really the idea of project monitoring is something the state, DHCD, takes responsibility for. So we want to make sure we disclose that in our NOFA, that applicants who receive an award of this funding from our trust will be required to subject themselves to state monitoring and state compliance. So we just really just disclose that to the applicants here. And we talk about our obligation as a trust to report to the city council periodically, but specifically with respect to the ARPA money. At the end of, this process, that we would issue a report to the city summarizing all of the activities, the funding program we've created, the commitments that have been made, the impact that they're going to have on the community, et cetera, et cetera. Go ahead, Deanna. And then here's the application itself, where we give instructions to the applicants. We provide them with a checklist and remind them that depending on whether they're applying for site acquisition or pre-development money or development money, they're going to be required to include the specific attachments and forms and charts that are checked off, dependent upon what they're applying for, to their application. That an application that doesn't receive all, or doesn't include, I should say, all of the required documents laid out in this section would be, considered incomplete. So then we remind them of where to deliver it and how many copies of their package and to whom and by when. We decided that here, this was really a good spot to talk again and reiterate that there's public participation that we hope and expect for, that there's a public comment period. We're suggesting here that the public comment period would end at August 31st. So we would upload all of the applications received in May and leave them on the city website until at least August 31st, which would give 5 months for the public to comment on all the applications we receive. We talk a bit about in that section too about, and we've got some work to do as a group here to settle this out. I'd love to, I'm looking at Bob as I'm thinking about this one, but we in looking at other jurisdictions and looking at the program, we're going to have to decide if there's a minimum deed restriction period counted in years, whether or not it's 20 years or 30 years or longer than that, or perpetuity. That's a decision that we need to make as a trust. So we've got some blanks in this section to get your input and to think that through. And then, Deanna, if you scroll down, I think where that leaves us is with the actual application form itself. I think this part of the packet has received the least amount of work from our little team. So please do look at this, but we're going to need, as a working group, to keep working on this application form itself. So we may, by the time we come back in again in a month, have changed it or modified it. Deanna, correct me if I'm wrong, we worked off of the existing application that the trust had been using up till now here, right? So this is.
It's a combination. So we blended in what was on the the Gloucester application with another format that we liked.
Okay. And I think that is the end of this packet. Am I right, Deanna? I think we're.
Yeah, I mean, I just scroll down. I mean, it's just form requirements.
Definitions and checklists to ensure that everything we're asking
Mhm.
The developer or applicant developer to include has been included. So the idea really is that the applicant themselves is going to fill out the checklist as a way of double checking that they've included what we've asked them to. Of course, looking for signatures and from authorized officials, titles, names, and all of that stuff. So we somewhere above in the language, we asked for 2 complete copies of the application to be delivered. We could certainly ask for more than that. We were being mindful about making a lot of paper and thinking that perhaps if there were 2 complete copies, one of which got duplicated and uploaded onto the city's website, then all of us and the public, everyone that's interested, would have a complete copy virtually on the website to look at any time. So we didn't want to, I know in the old days, you'd have to ask developers to make 8, 10, or 12 copies of these big packets, and it just doesn't feel current or necessary. So I'm going to stop and ask Deanna and Heather if they want to say anything more than I have, but that's a walkthrough on this document. And again, Heather and Deanna, you guys did a really great job of working to pull this together from a lot of different places and sources in a really short period of time. And I think you did, and we did a great job. So again, thank you both. So if people want to talk about the work and ask questions about it, give us feedback tonight, that's great. If you'd rather go away and read and make comments later, that's also fine, whatever everybody feels up for.
Just want to say terrific job in that short period of time putting this all together. Very impressive. Great job.
Deanna's smiling, but I got to know Deanna's kitchen pretty intimately in the last couple weeks. And I think we had coffee at the Salted Cod once, and we went somewhere else another time. It was fun, but a lot of work, but it was worth it.
Great job.
I think I would only add that, you know, we did do a lot of research into other communities and see, you know, what their application processes were like, what their requirements were, how they were using their ARPA money and how they were applying that into some sort of application process. And so it was helpful to see that other communities were doing a good job. And we hoped that, you know, maybe incorporating the pieces and parts that we liked out of those, that maybe were in a sense pre-vetted already, that, you know, we could come up with something that was a little bit more comprehensive.
No, for my own part, I was glad to hear that there's the opportunity to extend, if needed, you could extend the deadline, just from the standpoint that if somebody's a developer's submitting an application the first week of January, well, they wouldn't be submitting it. It's available the first week of January, but if they came up with something, it's a 4-month timeline, January, February, March, April. And Chris could speak to this better than I could, but it would be somewhat of a tight timeline that I guess could be extended if necessary. You know, things like getting site that, and especially I think probably the contact with abutters, neighbors, that type of thing, the communication with them, which is so important with any project, but it can also be time consuming, you know.
I mean, I think there's some assumption here that some of the projects are already in the planning phase, you know,
Yes.
and
Yep.
already being worked through, and they're not also sort of starting on the same day that we're rolling out this application. So
That's great. Yeah, I
some
was
of the
kind of
legwork
thinking
is
that.
probably already done, but
Yep.
we hope anyways.
Right.
That's a great point though, Bob. I do think we've given ourselves the ability to extend the deadline. We may well have to do that. It'll be interesting to
Mhm.
see as we get into the first part of January and into February, how many people download an application and take one away.
Yep. Sure. Yeah. I guess the only other thing that kind of jumped out at me, it's not a huge deal, but you know, as far as the local preference goes under number 4, funding priorities, all the bullets there, one of them towards the bottom is for local preference, projects that improve access to housing for Gloucester residents via a local preference, which I'm totally in agreement with, but it should probably, to the end of that, it should say something along the lines of to the extent allowed by law, because
good point.
I think there are different rules as far as how much local preference you can extend.
Great suggestion.
Mhm.
That's an easy one, but I think it's very wise. And I was thinking of you, Bob. I wonder if you have a thought about what we saw with other jurisdictions was that there was this 20-year deed restriction that was kind of had to be agreed to by the applicant in order to access their ARPA funds. And I wonder what you or anyone else, but especially you, Bob, with all your lending experience, think about that. Is that too short? Is that typical in Gloucester? What makes sense for a time period? And Greg,
You know,
maybe
from
you-
what I've seen, I think it's somewhat typical. I've seen 15 years, I've seen 20, you know, depending on the type of project. you know, land trust is properties here in Gloucester. They're under a 99-year lease that started about 25 years ago, so they still have a ways to go. But I think 20 years is pretty typical. And 15 years to me seems a little too tight, you know, just personally. But I think I've probably seen 20 years more than any other time period.
So I've just got a couple of comments, and I think they might affect what you might target in terms of projects. I think on the first page or second page, you talked about the criteria of the use of funds from the U.S. Treasury, that it had to be for households that were at the 65% AMI. And then later on in the document, you talk about funding 80% potential projects. So I think that's something we just have to be clear on what the use of the funds can be exactly in terms of household. The other point too that you just raised, again, you can kind of set the term of a restriction, but my understanding is, and this doesn't have to be the goal, it's not listed anywhere in your document, but if you do want to have units added to the subsidized inventory that the state holds in the balance of attaining 10% for 40B purposes, municipal action has to be a 30-year minimum. Is my understanding. So there are things that can be added to the subsidized inventory at shorter timeframes. There are specific funding sources, like if you are doing a lead restriction, or you're doing, there's another one. So some of those 15-year ones can count. But if it's purely just a municipal action, I think it has to be at the 30%, at the 30-year level. So those are just a couple of things that we can try to get some clarity on. But the big one, I think, is household income levels that you're targeting, because that would affect, you know, how you've tiered it for projects that are at 80 or 60 or 30.
I'm glad you raised that. So Deanna, you and I were doing some revision work today prior to the meeting, and we did both see the 65 and thought, well, that's first of all an unusual amount. It's usually 60 or 80. But you're right.
Right.
That is not congruous with 80% then. How can you can't have 80% if you're restricted at 65. So we need to figure that out. Thank you for catching
Yeah,
that.
and to make it even more interesting, they also say, or triple the national poverty level, which comes up with another number that's neither 80 nor 65. It seems like the safe bet is the 65 without any further justification. But we'll try to get some more clarity on you know, if there's any room beyond that.
I saw that you had, the committee had decided on 60%, and we have leeway up to 65%. And I did see the 80%, but I thought that related to home ownership and not rental, which is what the 65% applies to.
But it sounds like, Greg,
we
you're
can clarify that.
right. Are you pointing out to us, Greg, that 65 is a number
It may
that
be an ARPA requirement.
ARPA,
The
right.
ARPA requirement, I did, like, that was the very last thing that I went back, because we questioned it when we were together, and I double checked that, like, just before I sent off the email.
I mean, I would say that all the things that you've set for priority in general for the trust make a ton of sense. It's just a matter of if this particular funding source has additional requirements or criteria
Right.
that, you know, it might be something that, you know, after this NOFA, and then you start thinking about, or maybe you talk about funding availability, because you do have a couple of different sources, and you could get an applicant that's in one of those higher tiers, and maybe that's something that you use that short-term rental revenue for, or, you know, that type of thing. It wouldn't be
a question, Greg. Could I get your opinion on something? You know, regarding number 2, notice of funding availability. This paragraph reads, the U.S. Treasury updated its guidance to clarify that ARPA funds may be used to finance the development, repair, or operation of any affordable rental housing unit that provides long-term affordability of 20 years or more to households at or below 65% AMI. So by reading that, it appears to me that the ARPA funds can't be used for home ownership. Is that your interpretation too?
It's, it's like you keep reading, there's
Yeah.
that talks about certain activities. But I think the challenge would be is if you're down at that income level, you may not be able to qualify for home ownership through a conventional mortgage or even a subsidized mortgage. So I think that's probably why it's set at that level. And again, my only point about the 20-year is, that's the minimum. And it's just a question of if the units that you support, some of them could be in a 40B application, some of them could be just, created in a project that, is 100% affordability, whatever it is. If it's a goal of the trust to get them added to the subsidized inventory, then we just have to be mindful of what that minimum restriction timeline would be, whether it might be 30. Just experience with our inclusionary ordinance, we say perpetuity, which kind of really covers the base. I believe the guidance from the state would be a 30-year minimum.
Great, thank you.
That's really helpful. I certainly can't speak for everyone, but I think for myself that it certainly is a goal to try to add qualified units that help us get to the 10%, right? That's important for us as a community. We want to do that.
Yep.
And I would add too, I think, one of the concerns that I had as we were running through here is that we were probably contradicting ourselves at different points in
We did.
in the process. To sort of piggyback on that thought though, I mean, we were also trying to create an application that could be easily adapted beyond ARPA to just our regular funding availability. So I think it was sort of like your head is shifting back and forth to like, oh yeah, this will work, and but not for ARPA. So yeah, I think we definitely have to go through it with a fine tooth and figure out the ARPA requirements and where we are limited.
I mean, I guess the other option, you could also try to identify what funding you have available for other activities for the time being. You could talk about the different funding sources you have, use the same time window, encourage people to apply because you want to see everything potentially out there, but it might be just a limited opportunity for.
I mean, this is weird, but would it make sense just to really try to create two applications at this point? One is the NOFA and then one is just sort of a standard funding application based on monies that we would receive from short-term rental or CPC or wherever we might be able to acquire them.
I hate to make more work, but it would seem to make sense, because the ARPA requirements are so specific.
Yeah,
I think
I
think we can do that, Deanna. Now, with this work getting close to being done, we can address the issues raised tonight and the comments that come in. But I think we can then adapt from this first iteration, a second version that does what Greg suggests, allows us to invest other more flexible funding that we may have available. The general monies that the trust has.
Yeah, I think you have a really thoughtful framework, good, robust way to review applications and measure them against each other. Fingers crossed you get many applications to do that with. And then, just dealing with funding sources is a minor thing. You don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Great.
Yep. So far I've heard that we need to figure out if home ownership is permitted at all under ARPA. We need to verify if the 65% of AMI or less rule applies. And if it does, that may mean we're not funding 80% units with ARPA money. And then it sounds like we should be thinking about a minimum of a 30-year deed restriction with this program so that any units we fund can be counted. So, as I said, if Deanna and Heather and I would be welcome and happy to get more comments over the next week or two, couple of weeks, we'll go back and do the research needed to make the updates to this work so far. When we do that and get through the initial wave of comments, we'll recirculate the document. The plan would be to come back again in a month and hopefully use the next 3 to 4 weeks to get all your comments in and see if we can share something that's ready to go by then.
If possible, I would really like to sort of narrow that opening for comments to not 3 weeks, but less than that.
Okay.
That would be really helpful.
How does everybody feel about
Read it now,
comments in the next
Deanna,
2
right?
weeks? Is that, if I asked
I can
everybody,
give you a day or two.
if I asked everyone to get their comments in within 2 weeks, does that feel fair and reasonable to the group? Can we do
It's
that?
just hard, it's hard to continue to work on things when you're anticipating, more commentary coming forward and over a long extended period of time. So
How about this? How about we say that comments by the end of the month, which is the 31st of the month, which is 2 weeks from tomorrow? Does that feel reasonable to everybody?
Okay.
Sooner if you can do it, but
all right, 2 weeks. That sounds good.
okay. So Greg, that was the one agenda item for tonight, to walk everybody through this, and we've got good initial comments and feedback, and I'm sure we'll get more of that, and we'll come back again in a month and hopefully have this thing ready to go.
Ready to go.
Okay.
Thank you all for your hard work.
I guess the
Yes,
only
thank you.
other thing you could do is if you do receive comment and you want to meet, so you're intending to meet as the subcommittee, revise, and then come back to the full.
I guess I'm trying to be careful with my wording. We're almost like a working group at this point. I don't even know that it's a subcommittee. It's really just a couple of us trying to
Yep.
catch that feedback. So I want to be sure that it's okay for us to work in an ad hoc way in that way and not be running afoul of any of the rules. But we did have one subcommittee meeting and it was helpful, but I'm not sure that we need that approach again at this point to get this level of work kind of worked through. But I don't know. What does others think? Deanna, Chris, Heather? What?
I think we just have some final touches to do. So it's up to everybody else, but I think the 3 of us can probably knock it out.
Okay, I'll try to get some feedback on those couple of things regarding the timeline and the 65, and hopefully the majority of the work has already been done. Great job.
Yeah, I mean, I think also, Greg, I mean, there's some minor sort of fill-ins around, like, we weren't really sure, like, where does the application go to? Is it community development, the planning department? So if there's some, oh, hold on 1 second. If there's some input that you have around that, that would be great.
Sure.
It's
Okay.
right on that cabinet.
Right. I mean, I think at the end, we give instructions for paper copies to be delivered to the planning department, but we should probably be very specific around the address and the suite and then all of that jazz.
Yeah, make the
can work
process
on that,
pretty
right?
transparent to them too, yeah.
Yeah.
Could I ask a dumb question? Do we have a set meeting date and time, monthly or whatever the case may be?
That's not a dumb question. So again, I'm kind of new here too. So make sure it's it's the third Monday of each month or second Monday, third.
Third.
Heather,
Third.
as my trusted co-chair or assistant chair, what's been the history?
The third Monday.
Third
Great.
Monday.
Thank you. Appreciate
So
it.
next meeting would be November 20th.
Got it.
And
Great,
usually,
thanks.
just so everyone's aware, right? So Greg and David ask me for an agenda about a week before and I give it to them. So if anybody wants to inform or add to or suggest items for the agenda, I would welcome that. And all you would really just need to do is reach out to me and make a suggestion and I'll put it on there. Unless it makes absolutely no sense, then I won't.
All right, sounds good.
Okay. Do
So
we-
any other, hearing nothing else, Greg, I think we had a good meeting and what, I'll
You can
follow
make a
you lead on, we just say goodnight?
You make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, so I'd like to make a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Second,
And then you have to roll call it.
All in
Okay.
favor?
Member Oaks,
Yes, please.
Member Fay,
Yes.
Daigle,
Yes.
Gillis,
Yes.
McCarthy,
Yes.
Boylan.
Yes.
Okay, we'll see you next month.
All right,
Good
bye.
Good night,
Thanks,
all. Thank you
everybody.
so
Thank you all.
much.
Yep.